Good afternoon, everyone. This is Professor Tarabishi, and this is USBAC Business Leadership Series. We are delighted today to launch our next version of the Business Leadership Series. But before we start, I want to wish you, on behalf of USBAC and all the partners and sponsors of the Business Leadership Series, a very happy and prosperous 2018. We are very delighted to continue our Business Leadership Series. And for January, we have what I call a very hot, trendy, and so important topic on social selling. And social selling has many different definitions, but the word social selling, of course, conjures the internet, mobile, digital, anything that you can think of that you can carry in your pocket, in your cell phone, computer, laptop, iPad, and how you do all the interaction on it may be considered social selling, but it has many different trends. I am not an expert on social selling, and I don't claim that I am. But what is important here is to bring someone that knows about social selling, that understands it, that understands the dynamics of it. And I am delighted to introduce Mr. Gene Finley, Senior Insights Manager for Sales Solution at LinkedIn. Many of you probably are using LinkedIn. If I poll how many of you are not using LinkedIn, it'll probably be maybe one if we're lucky. But this is a very important topic. And so what I like to do is give the floor to Mr. Gene to explain to us what is social selling 101 and how does it work. Gene, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me, Dr. Tarabishi?
Great. Fantastic. Thank you. And the floor is yours. And tell me just when to move the slides.
Awesome. I'm super excited to be here. Hello, everyone. My name is Gene. As Dr. Tarabishi said, I'm the head of insights for our America's LSS business. I'm extremely excited to share some strategies on how to tackle the fundamentals of social selling on LinkedIn in order to help accelerate your sales in 2018. Since I know that many of you are in different stages of your journey with sales, let's first level set around the problems that we're solving for. Please jump to slide 3. So it's not a surprise, but your customers have already researched you even before you formally engage with them. They're looking up product and brand information. They're checking references. They're asking the opinion of their connections and your customers. Next slide, please. And in fact, this isn't really hard to do. My wife Yelps every single thing. And as a husband, I can attest to how often this happens while I'm trying to select a restaurant for date night. Next slide. Your social media presence is your introduction to these buyers. In fact, 81% are more likely to engage with a really strong professional brand. Next slide, please. Fact, and given the fact that we're all in part of sales, we all lose deals. This is not something that should be foreign to us. Next slide. At the end of the day, losing deals impacts your ability to drive revenue growth. And there are a couple of big inhibitors that you and your colleagues are facing. Dr. Tarabishi, if you could click the arrow one more time, there's one more icon. Thanks. First, I'd like everyone to think about your most recent quarter end and that deal that you and your rep said was coming in. The prospect said that they were going to get the deal done, come hell or high water. And then 2 days before quarter end, you got an email that said, sorry, I can't get this done right now. I didn't realize I had to get approval of my VP or CFO or legal or really whatever. Or, I hate to say it, but we're going to go in a different direction and my boss wants to do something different. All of these are direct results of this first challenge with our buyers. They buy by committee, and more often than not, our sales reps are only talking to one of them. Next, let's imagine for a second that our reps are talking to more than one person. Are they even saying the right things? Think about Times Square. Everywhere you go, there are huge lighted billboards literally screaming at you. How often are they saying anything relevant to you? And how quickly do you tune them out? According to our buyers, reps are essentially acting like billboards. 77% of them say that sales reps are saying the wrong thing, signaling that they do not understand the prospect business. And finally, last but not least, I'd like you to think about the last time you were watching something on your phone, or maybe Netflix, only to have it stop. I'm a football fan, and this happened to me during the NCAA National Championship game. It was beyond exasperating. And how often is this happening in your reps' pipelines? Think about that. You've got some really great traction. They thought there was urgency around this business problem, and then nothing. Some of this relates a lot to the first challenge, and it's probably indicative that you weren't talking to the right person in the first place. But sometimes other stuff just comes up. Attention gets diverted, other projects get started, whatever there is. These are real problems that require a change in behaviors to overcome and increase your odds of winning. So then, what's the solution? Dr. Terabishi, next slide. And feel free to jump to slide 9. Thank you. So, social selling. Here's what it's not. Social selling is not a silver bullet. It's not a waste of reps' time giving them licenses to play around on social media. Social selling is a modern approach to sales that utilizes information from social networks to grow your business. Social selling can give you a much wider lens than you'd have if you were only relying on your CRM and phone. So what are the reactions and actions required to make social selling such an advantage? Next slide, please. These are the 4 actions. These are the social selling behaviors that you should master or start to put in place to take advantage and win more. The first is create a professional brand. The second is finding the right people, engage with the insights, and then finally, build strong relationships. Next slide. Now, LinkedIn, because of the sheer volume of people and updates on LinkedIn, we've got a really, really great set of data and a set of essentially a digital Rolodex that you can leverage to tap into this 500 million person dynamic and accurate database. So how do you do that? What's available to make your lives easier? Next slide, please. Well, good news, the old adage, there is an app for that. I'm going to show you some of the details of the differences between free LinkedIn and our sales-specific product, Sales Navigator, in a moment. But I want you to think through this graphic. It really captures the core of what the Sales Navigator product that I'll talk to you a little bit about solves for. How does Sales Navigator solve for the problems we discussed earlier? Well, to truly solve these problems we discussed earlier, LinkedIn had to come up with a more tailored experience. Today on LinkedIn, you have access to your connections and their networks, but that's only a small piece of a huge network that LinkedIn has to offer. And that's a large piece of why we built Sales Navigator. It's a dedicated platform for using the great network at LinkedIn, but instead of simply expanding your view into the bigger LinkedIn network, we want you to get focused and design the project for you to get focused on the people and companies that you care about most. Next slide, please. But talking about the product is not why we're here today. Today, we're here to talk about the fundamentals of social selling. I'll pepper in a lot of ways that you can begin to master this and some actionable things that you can do to take advantage of the tools and the strategies that we've laid out for you to help you win more in 2018. So let's begin. Next slide. When it comes to the fundamentals of social selling, getting started with the building blocks are really important. There are 4 key building blocks: creating a professional brand, finding the right people, selling through relationships, and engaging with insights. We'll dive into each one of these one by one, and I'll give you some tips that you can go and implement. Next slide. First, create a professional brand. We all know this by now. First impressions are pretty important. It's just as important for your online persona as it is for your person persona, and in some cases, even more important. Next slide. Building a professional brand on LinkedIn begins with your profile. What does your profile look like? Is it up to date? Well, I'm going to show you here what to do and what not to do. But first, let me tell you a story. As I was preparing this presentation, a colleague of mine shared a cold email she received. It was from an inside sales executive at a next generation technology company that could help her put her goals into motion. She wasn't sure exactly what that meant, so she Googled him, and the first result was his LinkedIn profile. And here it is. No common connections, not too much about how he can help her unless she wants to hire him for his ability to, quote, generate databases for identifying potential prospects. It's kind of awkward. Lots of grammar errors, no picture, zero trust, zero credibility, no thanks. Next slide, please. So let's compare this to Kellen's profile. If Kellen reached out to me via LinkedIn, I'd view his profile. His profile will clearly show how he can help. Kellen even provides me some personal touches so I can learn about him, and it directs me to more resources where I can learn about his offering. All super helpful information. It immediately establishes trust and credibility. He seems like someone I want to talk to. So if we break down his profile, there are 4 things that you can control and improve today. The first one is his professional photo. First impressions, they are really, really important. Not a poor angled selfie, not a crop group photo. This is a professional network. Have a clean headshot. This is your first impression. Next up, you'll see media. LinkedIn lets you share information that's important to you or relevant to your work to give an interactive angle to your profile. For prospects visiting your profile to see you reached out to them, this can help direct them towards content that can illustrate the point early and make the job easier for you. Next is a summary. A picture tells 1,000 words. We conveyed that already, but your words are important too. What makes you tick? Why do you do what you do? What are you passionate about? These are all things that make you more human, and at the end of the day, your prospects will want to buy from humans. And finally, his tagline. This should be action-oriented, not just your title. This way, at first glance, when someone's searching for you, they get a snapshot of what you do and why it's relevant to them. Next slide, please. So going beyond the profile, you as sales leaders can leverage LinkedIn to build out your presence as a thought leader. Buyers are 5 times more likely to engage with sellers who are known industry thought leaders. Simple things like commenting in a group, sharing important information, publishing content, all go towards building your professional persona. And that's who your buyers are going to see first. Next slide, please. So here are some ideas for how you can start building a professional brand today. Number 1, dedicate some time with your whole team to update your profiles together. Make it a priority. Come up with a regular cadence for you all to commit to building out the right professional brand. Number 2, bring a local photographer to get your whole team set up with professional looking headshots. After all, your employees and their persona online reflects on your company as a whole. And then finally, encourage your team to share content. It's likely that your marketing team is already creating materials as part of their campaigns, so all you need to do is reach out and establish a channel for your team to leverage what's already being created. Your marketing team will likely appreciate the amplification, and you'll be sharing relevant materials related to the product you're standing behind. It's a win-win. Next slide. So we've covered create a professional brand, and next up, we'll talk about finding the right people. As a sales leader, you're tasked with finding strategies to help your team focus on the right companies and people to make your sales team, to focus on the right companies and people to make sure your sales team is spending their time in the right places. At LinkedIn, our sales development professionals are encouraged to consider all possible contacts on this matrix. We have account potential on the x-axis and the likelihood to buy on the y-axis. We then look for the biggest accounts in these segments. The overlap, the top right quadrant, should be where a rep finds his or her most lucrative opportunities. But there's a third dimension we can apply that doesn't look so great on a slide, but makes intuitive sense. Where do I have relationships that I can leverage to expedite the process? Our sales teams use this matrix to prioritize accounts and further narrow those companies where there are strong pre-existing relationships and an introduction opportunity. Next slide. What you're looking at here is a screenshot of our company search that allows you to filter companies across multiple facets to prioritize your approach. I would start by isolating companies in industries I target, for instance, software, oil, and energy. I would then narrow that filter using company size and revenue to generate a list of the biggest opportunities in my target market. As you narrow down on these accounts and save them, the system learns and recommends other accounts with similar characteristics. So the machine starts doing the work for you. Most sales development or client development professionals are probably using LinkedIn to search for or look up their prospects on a more individual basis. However, on LinkedIn.com, you can search for individuals in context or run a basic search. But Sales Navigator, as a standalone professional platform, takes this one step further by enabling advanced search, where you can create dynamic, target lead generated lists, and then filter from there to save leads on the actual console. Next slide. For finding the right people using social selling, we have 3 key tips and takeaways. Number 1, make sure your team is connected so you can see any shared connections. I'll talk about more in the next section about sharing connections. Number 2, research. Remember, there are more than 5 buyers on any average buying panel. Go beyond just your target lead and an account. You want to look up their peers at the same company, so start identifying who they might be. And finally, train. Some of you are likely more familiar with these concepts than others. You can imagine that your team also feels as such. If you want to try implementing certain steps on how to start social selling, make sure you don't leave any man left behind. Both new employees and experienced employees will need and appreciate training and support when it comes to adopting new processes and tools. Next slide. We've covered how to create a professional brand using your profile and how you can use LinkedIn or Sales Navigator to find people who match your target prospecting audience. Now let's talk about how you can use those shared connections we mentioned to sell through relationships. Next slide. Everyone in sales is familiar with a cold call. Most of us have been on both sides, the cold caller or cold emailer, and probably also the person being cold called. It happens every day. 90% of decision makers claim they don't respond to cold outreach. I'm not surprised. But at the same time, sales teams still need to sell to people who they may have never met. How can we get over this? How do they go beyond cold calling? Well, say you have shared connections or several shared connections with your team. That's a great asset to use. But what do you do with those shared connections? How do you sell through those relationships? Next slide. Well, there are really 2 flavors of selling through relationships. Once you've identified a shared connection, you can either use a warm introduction or you can name drop. A warm introduction is where you ask your shared connection for an introduction to the prospect. A name drop is where you mention the shared connection in your message. When it comes to these, we need to keep 3 things in mind. Number 1, ask for permission strategically. While warm introductions are often extremely effective, they require a large amount of commitment, and you're effectively asking someone to stick their neck out for you. So only request when you think that it'll have the most impact, not for every prospect that you come across. This goes for name drops too. Though it takes less from a shared connection, still ask for permission by attaching their name. You're now bringing their personal brand and tapping their relationship with the prospect. Number 2, make it extremely easy. Asking someone to introduce you is already asking a lot of them, so try to automate it for them as much as possible. Respect their time and offer them an out in case they're not comfortable with it. If they are willing, offer to write the email for them so that all they have to do is hit send. And lastly, Follow through. Don't forget to close the loop with the introducer and let them know how the conversation went. Next slide, please. So here are your 3 fast tips that you can take and put in place to start leveraging relationships. 1, lead by example. Make sure that you're encouraging your team to share their relationships. Be proactive about that. Number 2, network internally. Use your team meetings. Incorporate asking who's in your network into that. Build a muscle. And lastly, number 3, use templates. Email templates are absolutely amazing. They save time and they can help create a repetitive process to ensure that you're creating a great experience for your partner and share connection. Next slide. So we've covered the first 3 building blocks. Next, we'll cover Engage with Insights, which is our last. Sales has always been driven by some relationship, cold or warm. The approach we teach is based on the science of neurolinguistics, the study of how the brain processes language. One of the findings of this discipline is that the brain processes information best when it connects emotionally with an idea before grappling with a logical argument. So this intuitively makes sense to all salespeople. We call it establishing rapport. However, what I find is that most reps forget about the power of insights. Remember when I told you that 77% of buyers don't believe sales reps understand their business? Well, key to solving part of that is data. Data can be uncomfortable for some, but it's what separates Warren Buffett from the average investor. Invest time in understanding industry-wide challenges and the metrics that matter most. Pay attention to activity like job changes, promotions, news articles, and mentions of your prospects on LinkedIn. And then use this information as an informed seller to build your rapport. Next slide. So finally, we've covered all of our building blocks, and these are the last fast tips I'll share with you today about engaging with insights. The first, start really small. Start by sharing or liking and commenting on others' content. Number 2, follow target companies. And number 3, look for openings. Pay attention to opportunities for you to lead with data. Look for job changes, look for promotions, look for information in the news that you can use to spark a conversation and build rapport. Next slide. So, okay, we've covered a lot. And you now have the fundamentals for social selling. I hope you learned something new at today's session. I really appreciate you all joining me, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Gene, thank you so much. This has been very fantastic here. And I had some questions, and before we get into the questions of the audience, for everyone else that's joining here, there's a section on the right-hand or left-hand navigation, depending on where you have it. But you can enter questions in, which I will actually end up reading for everyone else. So now you have an opportunity to enter your questions, and while I ask Gene some questions, you can enter yours in, and then we'll follow up with some of your questions that you have. So Gene, I want to go back a little bit and ask you some questions here. And maybe you can help the audience, because we have different groups of audiences here. Some are very advanced with the media and social media and all this. And some are still using the classic model of a business card that you give and you take, and then you follow up with a phone call or an email, if you may. And explain to us how we've evolved from just exchanging of business cards or cold calling via phone to what you're doing here. You covered a lot, but just in simple terms, in simple words, explain to them why this is powerful, why they should invest the time and effort and actually put a lot of thinking behind this. If you can explain a little bit of that, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. That's a really, really great question. So when I think through where I started, I've had businesses spend time in management consulting. And when I started, the business card was extremely popular. And I always ran into the same problems. Either A, I collected too many of them, or B, I lost them. Even if the relationship was really, really important to me. I mean, humans, when you're traveling, it's just really, really easy to lose things. That's the first piece, is just like being able to track and manage and maintain. The second challenge that I think that this solves is like critical mass. being able to reach as many people as you possibly can really quickly and building rapport with large amounts of people. At the end of the day, the last thing that we covered was about how relationships are all about the rapport that we build. And giving someone like a drip or a feed where they can constantly look at either what your company is doing, the innovation behind it, how you're interacting, and how you're helping move forward a business problem, and how you're contributing to solving for those things. I think you don't get that in a business card. So really the power of LinkedIn solves for both the organization and management of the contacts, the things and the folks that are really important to us. And then two, it helps us reach critical mass really easily and really quickly. So, I mean, to me, when I think through the evolution, we've gone from just simply collecting a card to taking something and giving ourselves a chance to scale, which really helps drive sales.
Okay, so Gene, we have a question that just came in here, and it's a nice segue to what I just asked you here. So here's the question. So if someone accepts your connection request, when is the best time to message them? Should it be immediately as they accept, or give them a few days? It reminds me of it's like when to move. When is the most strategic time for you? Do you move right away, or do you hesitate a little bit to show you're not that eager? Or is it you give it a day rule, wait 1 day to respond, or an hour? What's the science? You mentioned science. So I know there's an art to it, and then there's a science to it. So why don't you give us both answers, the art part and then the science part?
Yeah, so the art part, I can absolutely give you some insight on, and the science part, I don't actually have hard numbers to tell you what works more often, but I think that's a great question and something I'll try to follow up on offline with you, and you can share with the group. I think from a science piece, I've seen two different approaches, right? I've seen, the approach for like a smaller to medium-sized business. The faster you follow up, the better. I've seen companies that have started with 5 to 10 person company, and then seen 100 to 200 person companies, both in the startup world and then just businesses that are been humming along for 5 to 10 years. And those sales reps are really aggressive. And so I don't see any issue with kind of reaching out immediately. I think for larger companies, the nature of their sales cycle, the nature of kind of their targets and kind of how sales folks are comped may also impact how fast that they reach out. And then obviously the business as well. So depending upon the business, depending upon the industry, and I think will help guide you. I think that the hard and fast rule is, if in my mind and what I've seen experientially, is that if you're smaller or part of a medium-sized company, and you've got a really compelling argument, and you've reached out or someone's reached out to you, you want to immediately follow up. You want to be top of mind for that individual. If you're larger and you're still experiencing growth, 20x, 15x type of growth, then I suspect that you probably have more calls than you can field, and there's probably some automated way to go about kind of responding. But in many cases at scale, it's really difficult to respond to everyone immediately. So I suspect that, again, experientially, I've seen a little bit slower of a process. The motions there for large and small companies just happen to be different. So, I mean, that's my experience answer. From a data perspective.
Yeah, we got a comment here, and it's a very important comment. When I was actually asking the question, it came to my mind, but I wanted to phrase it correctly. It says, it sounds like dating, right? And he gets into how he met his wife, but that's not the point. But it is a little bit like dating, right? When to move and when not to move. And isn't selling that, there's that, what I call it, you might want to call it that dance, that art of when to engage, how to engage. You mentioned it earlier, and how you write your correspondence and how you approach them and how you establish trust in the beginning. If you can explain a little bit of that, and maybe I know you explained it from a system approach, you do A, B, and C, but maybe if you give us more of a holistic approach, kind of what are they after? Because people will remember step 1, step 2, step 3. People will remember the flow of things. Maybe if you can talk a little bit of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me pull this apart, because there's a lot of layers to that question. I think that when I think through, I would absolutely agree with the analogy. Like it's a lot like dancing. And so when I think through a dance, there are your highs, your lows, there are your standard steps. And so like your standard steps are a lot of the things that I went over. But I think some of the things that we can neglect or kind of forget, I think, stem back to the last slide I showed about using insights to kind of fuel that rapport. So for example, there are times in the marketplace where a company is struggling. Perhaps their stock has fallen 15%, and there's enough news and information where you can go out and look and try to understand how they're going to approach that problem, or really if that's an industry-wide problem. So like, there is enough information for you to understand or have a filter at least of when there might be the right moments to engage. And so that's just understanding how to leverage that data, and then understanding how to parse that out and understand the business challenge and problem that they're looking to solve for. So I think that's the first thing. I think that the second piece is that ultimately you have to end this dance, right? And you want to land a sale. And so I think communicating what your intent is, making sure that you have a really, really strong set of advocates and understand like the buying process and the buying committee inside of an organization is part of that dance, right? And so to nail or stick the landing, as we like to say at LinkedIn, right before the standing ovation, what you want to make sure that you do is to make sure that everyone that's been a part of this buying journey has been brought along and is the same spot. So that when you do land and when you do stick that landing, that you have a higher likelihood of success. I think what tends to happen is that we get really distracted with everything in the middle, but asking the direct questions and making sure that we are aligned across the organization when we're having to sell into multiple people is part of sticking that landing. So, to me, there are the dance steps, and then there are the major pieces. And I think the two key takeaways are, again, taking that information that you can get from LinkedIn, from CNN, from other news sources, and understanding when to pull in data and how to leverage it and how to center around like the business initiative. And then the last piece is sticking that landing and understanding how to bring people along the journey so that when we do get to the end of the dance, it's a standing ovation.
Okay, so let's get into some technical stuff here. Another question that we received here is, the question is, we use HubSpot, and basically saying, recently, any tips on using LinkedIn and HubSpot together? I don't know what HubSpot together is, but I think they're trying to compare and see if there's a complementarity of sorts between both.
Yeah, that's a great question. Unfortunately, I don't have enough information to answer that. But I believe if you go on LinkedIn.com and you do some searches on some of the open forums, there's information that's out there where you can, essentially dig into like the integrations that exist between HubSpot and LinkedIn.
Okay, so here's a question for you, and then I see a bunch of questions coming in, so we're just warming up here. Here's a question for you, Gene. I don't know if you know the answer to this or not, but now I think LinkedIn done a fantastic job with their app that they have now that you can download on your cell phone, okay? And automatically the app is integrated to many different things that you have, to your connections, to everything that you use here. Talk a little bit about the use of the app, and not just in front of the computer and in your office. You actually are, having coffee and you see something coming in your LinkedIn app, and you quickly respond to it. Give us a little bit of the strategy for these people, not the technical stuff, but just, you should tell them, listen, the app is important. You should this is part of your toolbox, part of your outreach toolbox, selling, engagement, trust building. How would you explain this to the people that are debating about adding another app to their phone and having it part of their daily work routine?
Yeah, that's a great question. I had a mentor at a startup. He's the CFO of a company that hopefully should be IPOing in 2018. And I asked him, how do you stay so smart on the market? And he said, oh, well, I just get alerts every single morning. And it actually helped me build a habit for myself to pause, set up some alerts, look for the things that matter most to me, follow the companies that matter most to me, and start to carve out time in my morning where my brain is fresh for me personally to just go through and scroll down my feed and look for things that might be related to, the companies or the folks that I'm most interested in. And so I've got, I built a habit of that myself. So I think that's the number one thing, that mobile device helps as a forcing function. It can also be a distraction, but really can help as a forcing function for you. And so the app, I would, encourage everyone to leverage as a way to constantly be following and have a pulse on, getting job changes, changes within a business, product launches, news and information about industries, larger business like challenges. I think because the business world is very much, companies are ran by humans and humans are emotional beings. It's a great way to follow kind of.
Okay. So Gene, saying this, somebody comes back and says, how would you reach out to someone who you don't have any connection with, right? And you don't know them basically, and you want to establish a connection, but more importantly, you also want to establish credibility, right? How do you do that? Any ideas? You basically don't know the person, but you want to get in touch with them. So how would you use LinkedIn to make the connection, to establish the credibility, and to move forward, I guess?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit about this. So there's the warm, and then there's the warm introductions where you can leverage someone's name. In this case, you don't really have a relationship. So, if there are absolutely no connections at all, I would start investigating the network of the folks that exist for that specific target company and look for folks that I do have relationships with. A lot of times our connections, our shared connections, we only look at that first degree, but that our second and third degree can be extremely, extremely powerful. And so by looking for ways to reach down into our network, that second or third degree, I think it's a way to get to the right person. The second thing is, again, just follow what's going on with the company and look for ways to interface with things. I know a lot of companies will post events on LinkedIn. And so actually attending events in person and just being proactive about following your target companies and your target prospects is being able to do that successfully.
So here's another question that comes in here. And you mentioned it earlier, but you showed the example of an individual creating their profile of themselves on LinkedIn, and you're approaching them from a person perspective. We also know now that with LinkedIn, you can create also a company profile. Talk a little bit about both and how you connect both.
So when you say connect both, help me understand a little bit what you mean by that.
So let's say, because we are the US SPAC not only deals with big corporations, we also work with small businesses, and small businesses might be a 6-group company, or even a 3-person company, or even a 1-person company. And maybe that 3-person company, it's 3 friends working together, and they created a company, right? But each one has their own personal LinkedIn profile page. And yet they've created a company, and now they've created their own company profile page on LinkedIn. How to balance both?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I don't personally have a company page. Obviously LinkedIn does. And for me, my personal network and my personal contacts may or may not overlap with the same contacts that I want as part of my business. So I think the first thing is to be able to clearly delineate between which target or which people in your network you really want to be a part of it. I think the second thing is just using in-mails and the other ways to communicate with folks to have them interact with that company page. The company page is intended for businesses to be able to share updates and share alerts and talk about all the amazing things that they're doing in the community. And so for me, it's more looking for ways to drive traffic there. And a lot of that kind of steps outside of the social selling space, but a lot of it is still very much related to understanding how to use digital marketing to funnel people to the right spot. And so I would encourage everyone to visit the LinkedIn.com product page and investigate and just look at the strategies that other folks are doing or some of the recommendations we make to make sure that for your marketing funnels that folks can actually get to your company page.
And we have a question here, and let's say you're applying for a job, and then the person that is hiring you ends up looking at your LinkedIn page and then contacts individuals that are second or third degree connected to you and them, right? Any insights or general comments about this? Have you seen this? What's some best practices about this? Should you reach out to certain people on your first degree connections or second degree saying, if somebody reaches out to you, how do you handle this? This is a whole new medium now. Classically, we would provide references based on our CV, and they can call these references upon request. But now people are going outside this medium. They're going to your Facebook, they're going to your LinkedIn, they're going to many different outlets to see who are they hiring, right? And some of it is fair, some of it is unfair, but LinkedIn seems the most appropriate from a business perspective. What's your input on this?
Yeah, so there was a lot there, Dr. Terabishi. Would you mind kind of maybe distilling it down just a little bit for me in terms of the question?
Basically, what would you recommend for people that are seeking jobs and using LinkedIn? What should they be doing to prepare for that?
Oh, okay, yeah, that's an amazing question. You know, our LinkedIn Talent Solutions business is our largest business. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And you know, for job seekers, I think there's a lot of overlap between what sellers are trying to get accomplished and what a job seeker is trying to do. A couple key things. Number one, what you want to do is start to follow the companies that you're interested in. Be up to date. Be a part of conversations. Comment. Give live, real, candid feedback on product announcements. That's the first thing. Be active. The second thing is look to develop relationships with the right people, right? And so from a sales perspective, we built a tool, Sales Navigator, to solve for that for the sales world. But I think from a recruiting standpoint, you want to look for recruiters. So on LinkedIn.com, I mean, you have every ability to kind of do an advanced search and look for recruiters that say LinkedIn.com, LinkedIn. And so that's the second thing you want to do. You want to look for ways to build relationships. There are folks out there that are looking for warm introductions for great candidates. And I think the third thing is just make sure your profile is on point. All too often, I hear stories of folks that had amazing experiences when they had an updated profile photo, they had the right summary, they communicated what they were looking for, and did a really great job of carving out the skills and also getting some recommendations. Consider your LinkedIn profile as your digital resume. And again, from a sales perspective, if your online persona is that first impression, then I'd also make sure that, you know, from a job seeker perspective, that your LinkedIn profile for recruiters or folks that are looking to hire really great talent, that you treat it the same way.
Okay, this is excellent. Gene, this is fantastic. This is very helpful. Here, we have one question. It might be a combination of a question, but maybe a little bit of a small complaint, saying some people don't like to get these extra notifications saying it's their work anniversary or X, Y, and Z changed their job and stuff like that. They want to stop these notifications here. So I guess the question is, how do you stop it? Maybe it's a technical question here, but maybe if you want to respond to this.
Yeah, you know, very similar answer to that I stated earlier. So the LinkedIn.com website, I mean, from your preferences standpoint, you can go in and essentially turn off the notifications that you don't want to see. So I would encourage anybody to simply do a quick Google search or go to the LinkedIn.com website and look at some of the forms to have a step-by-step process of turning off notifications. But you know, you can do it both from your browser, and you can also do it for your phone.
Great, excellent. And this is the last question here. I think we've exhausted all the questions here. But if you want to share maybe one or two or even three top priority recommendations. It's January now, so people have resolutions. People are putting down things that they want to accomplish for the year here. So what would you tell them to do in January moving forward, and especially dealing with LinkedIn as an excellent source, as a resource on how to improve, engage, and build their business? What would you recommend for them to do?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think number one, I'll split this into three things. Number one is set an aggressive goal to build a new muscle, and make that new muscle that you build, make it social selling, make it a priority. And so think through all the things that we covered, from building a personal brand to engaging with insights to looking for the right people to sell. Take some of the tips that I shared with you and get really, really aggressive of solving for and building and strengthening that new muscle. So that's the first thing I would say you do. I think the next thing is to get really, really clear and focused on like the types of businesses that you're targeting. The more targeted and specific that you can be on LinkedIn, the more useful. And so the Sales Navigator tool was built for you to be very specific, to look for those decision makers. And so the first step before even jumping in there is just having a very clear goal, whether you're focusing on a market or whether you're focusing on a specific industry, whether you're focusing on the CFO or the CRO. Make sure that you have a very focused target list of people that you want to go after or companies. And I think the third thing is to be comfortable with failure, to be quite frank. And I know that sounds weird, but I mean, so you win in sales and you learn in sales. I don't call it losing, I call it learning. So you win in sales and you learn in sales, and there's always something to learn. So make sure that you're flexible enough to reevaluate and calibrate the sales motions that you put in place earlier, and be comfortable with calibrating and changing your messaging and updating the email template and changing your profile browser, or maybe subscribing to other groups. Those are the three things that I would suggest you do.
Excellent, Gene. I personally, and I'll do this as an individual here because I've experienced this, and I'll share it as for everybody to see here. I think, and I did it last year, and I'm very glad that I did it, is first of all, I think all of you should just go back into your LinkedIn if you haven't done it, or you are doing it, or you've done a little bit of it. Go in and update your profiles. Just it's at the beginning of the year. It's one of those things that you have to do. Just get it out of the way. Update your profiles. Number two, I highly recommend if you download the LinkedIn app on your phone. The phone is becoming very powerful now. There's many different things you can do with it, including using it as a business tool. And LinkedIn is an excellent app for you guys to download on your phone to have it part of your toolbox. And number three, as Gene mentioned with his tips here, is to start slowly looking at what are the offers, what are the ideas that LinkedIn are providing with you, and take small pieces of it to start to apply it to your business. And failure means that you're trying, which is great. That means that you're doing something, right? And you never know. You just never know how something that you've done totally wrong can turn into a success, you know? And if you do this, and if you start doing this, you might think in the first quarter of 2018, you might get a lead that can translate into business. And if you've done so, the hour you spent today, the time you spent in looking at LinkedIn and how to utilize it and how to integrate it is worth your time and effort. So that is my recommendation for everybody on this. And I want to thank you, Gene, for your time and effort today. And on behalf of USBAC and its partners and its members, we want to thank also LinkedIn for agreeing to support USBAC. And we're delighted to have you. This has been an excellent webinar. And I want to also thank everybody for joining our webinar today. We have a new one coming up on January 23rd, and it kind of ties well with social selling. And we probably heard it, and we're going to hear more and more about it so many times, and you're going to see it in many different forms. It's about artificial intelligence. But yet artificial intelligence can mean many different things to many different people. But our next webinar on January 23rd will talk specifically about artificial intelligence and the opportunities available for small business. How can small businesses utilize artificial intelligence, not just within their business, but also to engage with customers, to plan for the future. So we welcome you all to join us on January 23rd on the topic of artificial intelligence and opportunities for small business. On behalf of everybody at USBAC and Professor Tarbishi, I want to thank you, Gene, again. And you all have a wonderful and successful and safe 2018. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you all joining.
Thank you.